Hello friends, hope all of you are doing good. So after a gap of almost 1 year, we are restarting the initiative of essay perspectives. So due to heavy workload, I felt I could not do much justice to the program, so I had to stop the program. But actually the response to the initiative has been indeed overwhelming. So when I met a couple of successful candidates when they visited my jurisdiction as part of their practical training, so most of them were very thankful for this initiative. I started getting responses from many successful candidates stating that this initiative was successful, so was helpful. So then I thought we should restart this initiative. Thanks for all the love. So on that note, from today onwards. So we are restarting this initiative. So the topic for today is a right is not what someone gives you, it's what no one can take away from you. Okay friends, without wasting much time, so let's start. Hello friends, as always I have my personal request. So my book Ethics, Integrity and Aptitude has been unfortunately pirated. So I urge all of you to buy original. So original book can be bought from the seller Arvind India on Flipkart and Amazon, and seller Affordable on Amazon. Please buy original, stop piracy. Friends, as I always tell you, before we start any essay, we have to conceptualize that essay as being made of various components and subcomponents. So as far as this essay topic is concerned, it can be conveniently divided into these components. So first we would introduce the topic, then we would discuss the topic at length. So that means we would give a deeper explanation about the topic, and then we would delve upon the need for rights. Then we would critically analyze if rights should never be taken away. Then we would also explore the possibilities as to what should be done to make taking away of rights rare and just. So then we would conclude the topic. Friends, as soon as I saw this topic, I am reminded of a recent editorial in Hindu on Allahabad High Court ruling. So Allahabad High Court was hearing a petition filed by an interfaith couple who are in live-in relationship seeking protection from police harassment. Their contention is that police were harassing them apparently on the basis of a complaint filed by one of the family members. Regardless of the judgment given by the High Court, which was dealt in greater detail in that article, that is immaterial to the topic, but the mere approaching the High Court by this interfaith couple itself raises a few pertinent issues pertaining to rights. So issue number one is, apparently Indian Constitution has bestowed the right to life to these citizens, and they have personal liberty also. And here is an executive, which is represented by police, trying to infringe upon the right. To put it in the words of the topic itself, the right of personal liberty or the right to life endowed upon these citizens was being taken away by police. Correct? So here the couple approached the High Court as a means to protect their rights from being taken away. So thus here is the case of rights being taken away, and here is the case of couple attempting to prevent the taking away of those rights. Correct? Whether it is correct on the part of police to infringe into the rights of the citizens, whether the safeguard afforded in the form of judiciary enough for the citizen to protect the rights. So this topic seeks to explore in detail these and such relevant questions pertaining to rights. Friends, after we have introduced the topic, it is important to elaborate the topic in a greater detail in order to set the tone for essay. So thus first we will have to talk about the meaning of the word right itself. So right implies entitlement. In the simplest English, right means entitlement. A few such entitlements are codified, a few are non-codified. So, codified entitlements have legal backing in the form of constitution or law or executive instruction or court judgment, whatever. A few rights are implicit, they are not enumerated, they are not codified anywhere, yet those entitlements are accepted as entitlements by the society through a common understanding or through a convention. So, essentially, a right is an entitlement, whether or not it has legal or constitutional backing is right specific. Some rights may have such backing, some rights may not have such backing. So the topic essentially means right is not what someone gives you, it is something that cannot be taken away by anyone. Correct? So what do you mean by giving the right? See, this topic essentially has two components, two major things. One is giving the right, second one is taking away of right. What do you mean by giving the right? Giving the right means providing the right, provision. See, suppose to put in simple words, Indian Constitution has provided for many rights, fundamental rights. Correct? Part 3 of the Indian Constitution provides for fundamental rights. Article 300 of Constitution provides for right to property. Correct? So, thus, this is explicitly given. Correct? What do you mean by taking away of right? Taking away of right means infringement. What do you mean by infringement? Not allowing a citizen to enjoy that right. Snatching away that entitlement from a citizen is what we call infringement of right. Okay? Let us say to illustrate right to life. That means a person is entitled to live. A person is not entitled to die. Correct? But still a murder takes place. A homicide takes place. What does that mean? That means the right to life of that person is infringed. In the first introductory case of interfaith couple in living relationship approaching the High Court, they are entitled to live as they wish under right to life or personal liberty. Yet someone is not allowing to live the way they want. That means someone is infringing their right. Someone is snatching away their entitlement. Correct? To give another example, National Food Security Act entitles every citizen to get food grains at subsidized prices. Any failure of the government to supply food grains at subsidized prices would amount to taking away of such right. So often we read in the newspapers about hunger deaths in some remote part of the countries. Correct? That means though every person has or every citizen in India is entitled to subsidized food grains, however, that right is taken away by poor governance, taken away by ignorance of the citizen or whatever. Correct? So basically, taking away of the right means infringement of the right. Not taking away of the right implies protecting the right. See friends, it is important for you to appreciate here two things. Giving the right means providing the right. Not taking away the right means protecting the right. Then putting these two concepts together, what is the essence of this essay topic? The essence is that it is not enough on the part of any government or executive to merely give rights to its citizens. It is also important for governments to strive hard to ensure that such rights are duly protected, never infringed. So, this is the core essence of this topic. Correct? Then, coming to the this is the ideal scenario which we spoke about. That means every state should give the rights and should protect the rights as well. But this sounds slightly utopian. But in pragmatic world, is it possible to ensure that every right, even the non-codified right, to be protected by the state? So it's a moot point which we need to understand. Friends, in reality, every individual, if he or she has to ensure that his rights are protected, then he or she has to necessarily be dependent on others. Or to put it in other words, if protection of any right is a function of any variable other than the individual himself or herself, then the absolute protection of rights may or may not happen. It is a probability, not a certainty. But however, if the fulfillment of that entitlement is merely the variable of an individual himself, then such right can never be infringed by anyone. Okay? To make this complex concept clear, I think we need to take one or two illustrations. So first illustration is right to peace of mind. So we are all entitled to peace of mind, right? So thus, peace of mind, an individual, if he really wants to keep himself, his mind peaceful, he can certainly do it. It is all about his attitude. It is all about his psychological self. So only those rights that have a bearing on psychology can be controlled by an individual himself without being adversely or otherwise affected by external factors. Correct? Then let us take right to education. Here, if there is no access to affordable education, then that individual would not be entitled to that right. Take the example of children in tribal, remote, hilltop habitations, where though they have right to education, they have been given right to education under constitution, perhaps a school may not be available in their small habitation, or perhaps they may have to travel for say many kilometers to reach a school. In such a scenario, they would not end up in a school. In such a scenario, though they have right to education, their right to education is taken away. Even if a student in a tribal remote hamlet is really very much excited, very much enthusiastic to learn, but he cannot learn because that education is an external factor. So thus, to keep the things simple, protection of most of our rights which have a bearing on a physical self have to be necessarily dependent on external factors. So, thus, it is important that an ecosystem is created such that every right provided should be protected, should be safeguarded, should not be taken away. Then, let us talk about these rights in democracy and autocracy. Though generalizations may not be correct, yet we can very well say that it is only in democracy that there is a greater degree of protection of rights of citizens. However, in autocracy, that protection of rights of citizens is very less. That means in a democracy, there is a recourse to infringement of right. There is a recourse whenever a right is infringed. A citizen can fight to protect his or her rights. However, which is altogether absent in autocracy. And similarly, let us talk about the rights in market economy versus socialism. So, many economic rights are given in both market economy and socialism, yet the protection of those rights or the promotion of those rights, safeguarding of those rights gets better served in market economy vis-a-vis socialism, because in socialism there is more of state control which would try to infringe into the rights of citizens. Correct? So to the I think after this elaborate discussion, I think you are very well aware now that right is an entitlement which may or may not have a legal backing, and it is not enough for any government or state to merely provide the right, since most of the rights are since the protection of most of the rights is dependent upon many external factors. It does not just serve the purpose. If the rights are given, the ecosystem has to be created in such a way that the rights endowed should be adequately safeguarded and protected. So this safeguarding and protection of rights is more prominent and is more will happen more predominantly in democracy and market economy vis-a-vis respectively in autocracy and socialism. Then friends, after we have understood the topic itself, then we need to dwell upon the need for rights. And why do we need rights? The first and foremost thing is equity. If to promote equity, if we don't have rights, then it would lead to an inequitable societal order. So take the example of pre-independent India, where there was no right to equality. All the economic resources were cornered by only one segment of society, which was a minuscule minority. Correct? So then slowly, after promulgation of the constitution, so the rights were given equally to all the communities, so leading to treating everybody equally. So that has actually spearheaded the attempt of the government in building an equitable society. Perhaps it is only to elaborate. It was very difficult before independence for a person from a depressed community to get mainstreamed through education or entrepreneurship. But now, after independence, thanks to right to equality and positive discrimination, so more and more people from the depressed communities also are getting educated. Once they get educated, their economic status improves. Once their economic status improves, so they would also stand to compete with their counterparts in upper caste or in forward communities. So thus it is only this right of equality, right to liberty and other rights given by the constitution that has led to creation of an equitable society. Then scope for individual progress. It is only these rights that would allow an individual to thrive. Let us say if an individual does not have a right to choose his own business, right to choose his own occupation. Let us say an individual does not have right to free mooly. Let us say an individual does not have a right to acquire knowledge. Perhaps the individual progress would get curtailed, right? So thanks to the right to occupation, which is enshrined in the article, under right to liberty of the Indian Constitution, now people can choose the business of their choice. People can choose the vocation of their choice. They can invest wherever they want. So that would lead to development and improvement. Then this provision of rights and protection of rights would preempt civil unrest. See, if you can recollect the human history, it is fraught with so many examples where the civil unrest has taken place, revolution has taken place only when the rights of the citizens were suppressed. Take French Revolution, take Indian freedom movement also. The root cause for Indian freedom struggle was suppression of rights of Indian citizens by British. Correct? So this provision and protection of rights would preempt any such civil unrest and would lead to would lead to a peaceful society, peaceful societal order. And then to enforce accountability of institutions to members. Okay. By institution, I mean it can be a government, it can be any club, it can be any association, it can be a federation, whatever. So this only if rights are given by that institution to its members, just as in the state has given rights to the citizen, then only we can enforce the accountability of that institution towards the welfare of its members, that is citizens. So without rights, there is no accountability also. Then rights actually act as a guiding light for policy making. So once the right is given, or once the right is contemplated to be given, that actually sets in tone the direction in which the public policy has to move. Suppose once the right to education was enacted, that means that has given a clear goalpost to the government to channelize all its efforts towards realizing universal education. So if that right were not to be there, then perhaps the government would not set its mind on education. So once these rights are set, then government can tweak its policy towards promotion and protection of these rights. Those rights are very important. Friends, now we have come to the most critical part of this essay. We have already argued that the essence of this topic is that it is not enough for the government to merely give the rights, but it is also essential for the government to create an ecosystem that would protect these rights or safeguard these rights. Correct? But let us play devil advocate to this question. Obviously the counter question is, does that mean the right should never be taken away? Does that mean should the rights never be suspended? Does that mean should there be no restrictions on these rights? The answer is no. There should be some restrictions on these rights. These rights should be taken away. But when? Under exceptional circumstances. Now, before we get into that, first let us try to understand why can we not make the rights absolute? Correct? The first and foremost thing is that man is a social animal. Man lives in a society. When man lives in a society, in order to ensure that societal rights are protected, sometimes individual rights have to be suppressed. Correct? So one such example is, every citizen has fundamental right to choose occupation of his choice. Correct? But that does not allow him to pollute the environment in the garb of fundamental rights. So if the environment gets polluted, then it infringes the right of community to live a healthy life. So there should be some restriction on such right to occupation. So since man is a social animal, he lives in a community, his individual rights should not go against the rights of the community in which he or she lives. So thus, in such a scenario where community rights and individual rights come in conflict with each other, then it becomes very essential for individual rights to be taken away. Then in some cases, an individual joins an institution. By joining an institution, he himself gets himself subordinated to that institution. So thus, in the process of subordinating himself to that institution, he surrenders a few rights to the institution in return for a few favors of that institution, being a member of that institution. So thus, voluntarily, in some scenarios, an institution may forego his right. For example, by joining a school, a student surrenders his right to wear the clothes of his choice and accepts the institutional norm to put on the uniform. In a way, this is an infringement of his personal liberty to put on the clothes of his choice, but yet, since he is a part of that institution, he has to surrender his right of personal liberty in order to be a member of that institution and in order to receive the fruits of that institution. So then he or she has to wear the uniform, foregoing that right. It may be a simplistic example, but I think it makes the point. Then one's right might infringe the another's right. That means initially we spoke about how an individual's right cannot get in conflict with community rights. So here we are talking about how an individual's right cannot get in conflict with another individual's right. To illustrate, let us take the example of a moneylender. A moneylender under Indian Constitution, of course, he can choose the occupation of his choice. Thus, he can get into the business of lending, perhaps by setting up a bank. Correct? But this is his fundamental right. But his fundamental right of choosing the business of money lending should not preclude his clients from pursuing their right to live happily. I am reminded of this classic case of microfinance institutions in Andhra Pradesh. I think way back in there was a controversy way back in 2010-11 where these microfinance institutions were known to charge exorbitant rates of interest on the citizens, and hawkers and small people, small petty businessmen and all used to take microfinance loans from these institutions, but at a very exorbitant rates of interest, and finally they ended up committing suicides. So what I am just trying to tell you is, here this the person who ran this microfinance institution did it because he was endowed by the constitution to take up the right to do business of his choice, to choose occupation of his choice, but in the process he infringed into the rights of others to live happily and to prosper. Correct? Then what happened? Then the government came down heavily on these microfinance institutions and came up with lot of guidelines. They cannot charge rates of interest beyond a specified rate of interest. They cannot collect interest amount more than the principal, etc., etc. Thus, their right to do business got curtailed. Correct? So, thus, one's individual right cannot come in conflict with another individual's right. So, then individual right versus community right, which we have already discussed. Then comes the question of security. I think this is a oft repeated concept. One's right to free speech and expression should not put the security of citizens in jeopardy. So the best example is extremists using their right to free speech and expression to incite violence in the society. Correct? In such a scenario, it becomes essential for government to clamp down such rights. So next comes the question of privacy. One's right should not infringe into the privacy of others' right. So here this is an essential concept of protecting one's private space. To illustrate, a person having right to freedom of speech and expression cannot pass personal remarks against anyone. Everyone has right to privacy, her personal life, to the exclusion of his or her behavior in the community should never be questioned, should never be maligned. Correct? So if a person is unnecessarily intruding into the private affairs of the another person, then that is wrong. Then such acts should necessarily be restricted by state. Then last comes changed circumstances. See, always rights operate in the ecosystem of the circumstances. I would say every right is the product of its age. A right that is relevant today may become irrelevant tomorrow, or a right that is little relevant today may become more relevant tomorrow. So as the circumstances change, the rights also should evolve. To allow, to put it in other words, the right framework also has to evolve. So for example, earlier right to property was enshrined as a fundamental right by Indian Constitution. Later it was realized that how that right to property was being misused by some interests in order to scuttle the overall development of society, overall equitable development of society. Then that right to property, which was earlier a fundamental right, had to be relegated to a mere constitutional right. So of late, as the society has evolved, some new rights have come to the discussion. For example, some Scandinavian countries have now given right to internet to every citizen. Correct. So which was not relevant perhaps a decade ago, but now today since internet is ruling the roost, so right to internet is made a right. Access to internet is made a right. So similarly, there is a discussion to make right to same-sex marriages, right to right to divorce, etc. So many rights are there is a demand to make more and more entitlements are rights now. So as the circumstances change, the rights also have to be changed. We cannot say every right is sacrosanct. It cannot be altered. Friends, after discussing the need to restrict rights in certain scenarios, it is important for us to understand that though restriction on rights is essential, but such restriction should be used not as a norm but as an exception. Correct? Then the most ideal thing is for the government to do is to create an ecosystem, to create an environment that would make taking away of rights very rare. That would make taking away of rights very rare and very just. Correct? So how should that ecosystem be built? The first and foremost thing is ethics. Ethics is the bedrock of a peaceful society. If every citizen lives ethically, then infringement of others' rights becomes very, very, very minimal. If every citizen respects the life of other citizens, perhaps there would be no killings, there would be no genocides, there would be no violence in this world. Correct? So thus, the government may strive to prevent the violence, but government cannot preempt the violence, right? So the difference between prevention and preemption is that the preemption is more of a scenario where the scope for violence itself does not arise. Correct? So if every citizen starts respecting the life of other citizen, then there would be no assault, there would be no murders, there would be no homicides, there would be no genocides. Correct? So thus building ethics is extremely important. So to give you another example, if every citizen realizes that exploiting the fellow citizen is infringement of the other's right, if every citizen tries to treat his fellow citizen respectfully, then perhaps there would be a more equitable society. There would not be an exploitation of labor class by capitalist. There would not be exploitation of lower class by upper class. Correct? If there is no exploitation of a labor class by a capitalist, then the rights of labor class would always get protected. Who else will take away the right of a labor class other than the capitalist himself? Correct? Then that ethics on the part of capitalist would prod him to give better living conditions to the laborers, would prod him to respect the labor rights, would prod him to share his profits with the labor class. Then thus the rights of the labor class would be protected, not just protected but promoted as well. Correct? So this ethical part of the capitalist can only lead to the not just protection but promotion of the rights of the labor. Correct? So then like that, if every citizen starts to live ethically, then perhaps then the taking away of rights of other citizens becomes extremely minimal and rare. Then the second scenario is economic prosperity. Friends, if the society is economically prosperous, what does that mean? That means it has to be economically prosperous, and the prosperity should be equitably distributed also. Both the conditions should be met. In such a scenario, every citizen has the means to access his entitlements on his own. If every citizen is rich, he can go and take healthcare on his own. If every citizen is rich, he can go and have access to education. He will not be dependent upon government. He will not be dependent upon state for health or education. So thus, a citizen, so long as the entitlements have to be fulfilled by an external agent, that is state in most cases, then the protection of those rights becomes little difficult. If the citizen can himself afford a good education, if citizen can himself afford better healthcare without having to depend upon, say, state or government for that matter, then I think then only his rights would get more and more protected and promoted. Correct? So, government should strive to improve the economic prosperity, and it should also strive to ensure the equitable distribution of such prosperity. Then progressive social thinking. Economic prosperity is not enough. The thinking also has to be progressive enough in the citizens. So, to give the example of let us say mercantile communities of yesteryears, where they were rich, correct? They were rich, filthy rich. But yet, though they were rich, but they did not share their property with their sisters. The property was not given to daughters. The property was not devolved upon women, correct? So thus, then if women is not given the share in her ancestral property, then her right to father's property is getting infringed. So thus it is only progressive thinking, it is not just money. Perhaps economic prosperity would enable a person to access economic rights without having to depend upon government. But it is only the progressive social thinking of all the members of society that would lead to protection and promotion of societal rights. Correct? There may be untouchability against a successful entrepreneur from a Dalit community also. If a Dalit individual works hard, builds up his own enterprise, turns out to be rich, even then if he is not allowed into some temple, or even though if he is not allowed into the residence of an upper caste man, perhaps then his right to equality is getting infringed, right? Economic prosperity cannot serve the purpose of social cause. So it has to be a mix of economic prosperity and progressive social thinking on the part of every individual. Correct? Not just a few intellectuals. Then the last thing is, of course, even if there is infringement, that infringement should be in exceptional cases. Thus, Indian constitution mein the fundamental rights can be suspended under exceptional circumstances only. Thus, it can be suspended only during national emergency. Correct? So, similarly, it should be done by a just authority. Just authority. So, anybody, the infringement should not be done by anybody. It can be done only by only by a just authority. Correct? That means by a democratically elected government, if we may say so. And it should be in a just manner. Okay? Last thing I have forgotten to add, there should be a proper recourse to infringement. So, thus, even if somebody tries to infringe into rights of a person, then that person has a recourse to a particular institution to get his right protected and promoted. So, thus, if government or society is successful in building this ecosystem of economic prosperity, ethics and progressive social thinking with adequate provisions for suspending the rights in exceptional scenarios in a just manner, in a fair manner, and also having scope for a recourse whenever the right is getting infringed. Perhaps that is the most ideal scenario in which this society can function. Friends, now we are at the conclusion. So we have already argued in detail that the essence of this topic is that it is not merely enough for the state to give rights to its citizens. The state should also strive to protect and promote those rights as well. But however, such protection and promotion of those rights cannot be absolute. There should be scope for taking away of those rights, but such scope should be limited, should be in exceptional circumstances, and that too it can be done in a just and fair manner. Friends, before I close, I want to share one last thing. At least in this topic, the moment I saw the topic, I actually, this conclusion struck my mind. It was then I built the entire essay from conclusion itself. It was a kind of reverse engineering. So this is also one of the techniques. Whenever you see the topic, first you can think of a conclusion and then you can build the essay from conclusion itself. Okay, friends, hope it helped. So it has been, I also have got a gap of 1 year and then I have restarted. So happy to read your feedback. So happy reading. All the best, folks.